which brings us to this issue of net neutrality, which I always find, I mean, I have to read and write about this because this is what I do, but I actually haven't found the person who can actually explain to me. We have, I mean, in many ways, the whole net neutrality movement has a messaging, not a problem per se, but it's a challenge. You know, you say net neutrality and eyes just glaze over. You know, how do we reframe? I'm curious, from your perspective, how do we reframe the conversation? Yes. When we say net neutrality, what are we actually talking about?
I'm going to give this a whirl.
Please.
And yeah, you know, it's hard to rally around being neutral. I think is part of the problem. Like, yeah, let's all go be neutral on the net. You know, it's like that's just not something that's gonna, you know, really ignite people's passions to get organized. So that's definitely a challenge. But the idea is that I can connect to the internet with anyone else at a they call it a greater or equal, you know, connectivity speed, that everybody has the same access to the same pipes. And that doesn't mean that it's free or that it's, you know, that nobody has to pay for the internet or any of these things. But the idea is that also that the net remains, call it ignorant of content, that it doesn't distinguish whether a packet of information traveling across it is a video from YouTube or if it's, you know, a status message being sent to Facebook or something. The pipes don't know what's going on, and they just send the information around as best as they can. And that's the way we want to keep it. That's the best idea. So once we start distinguishing, you know, and becoming aware of what's being sent around, and this gets to get through faster, and this has to go slower because they haven't paid their fees, is where we get into a lot of trouble. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have a messaging problem.
we have a messaging problem, yes. No. You all have a messaging problem. I'm trying to understand it. I'm like, how do I write about this?
It is, I mean, I think part of what's difficult is that there's a technical explanation, right? There's this, and I'm not going to give my technical explanation just because, you know, I don't know. But it's speaking to, I will a little bit. You know, you've got a you got the lowest level of transport of data, and the fact that it's content agnostic, it doesn't know, it just moves things around, gives rise. No one. So I'll use an example. If we did put out a video talking about Lou Dobbs and his anti-immigrant rants. And along with that video, it had Soledad O'Brien talking about Latinos basically speaking up, speaking for themselves. Anyways, this little video that kind of went after Lou Dobbs. In an open internet, if CNN puts out the video, I put out the video, it goes wherever it goes. In one where there are multiple levels of, let's say, gatekeepers. You have Comcast, maybe they have a deal with CNN. You have CNN, and maybe they just think it's, not even CNN, let's say it's NBC, and they're like, we just rather not have this conversation happen over our stuff, right? It can get squashed at multiple levels. This is where something goes, a platform goes from being agnostic, basically, to one where you've got folks who at the lowest level can shut something down. People will say, you probably all heard this, well, why not the content providers? Why not a Google or a Yahoo or a YouTube or a Facebook? And part of it is if I get angry enough with Facebook, right, there's some, we'll say, inferior competitors of yours that I could at least in theory switch to. If I've got one choice of broadband provider, or maybe two, I'm probably paying too much for it in the first place. But if they decide, you know what, that's unsavory content, that community's voice, think of the Gina 6, that we're not ready for that conversation, they can put an end to it. And so that I think it's easier. I think part of our messaging needs to be talking about real world examples, what it can look like when you have net neutrality and when you don't. Because I do think it's not. I think there's a reason why it's very hard to sync up this detailed explanation with the actual impact. And so I think it's good to be talking about the impacts.
Where does Facebook stand on this issue?
Well, yeah, we are 6 years old.
So you're like what? You're in first grade, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you think about Facebook's Washington presence, you're looking at 1/4 of Facebook DC. Okay, yeah. We're still very, very small. So certainly net neutrality is among our top priorities. We've said publicly that we're in favor of this. I mean, our mission from the very beginning of the company was to make the world more open and connected, and you know, anything that anyone who's deciding who gets to connect or what they get to share, it inherently hampers that mission. You know, our CEO Mark Zuckerberg signed a CEO letter in October 2009 supporting the those goals of an open internet. Some of the filings in January cited Facebook-related examples of why net neutrality is so important. Certainly, it's something we care about and think about every day, but there's just only so much bandwidth. So we can't be on the front lines, and there are plenty of companies who can afford to be on the front lines and have the resources to be on the front lines, and we'll certainly support that.
I know, James, you wrote a blog post for the Huffington Post not too long ago about what's happening with net neutrality. I mean, last week was kind of a roller coaster week. I mean, I'm just curious, by the way, from your perspective, where do you feel the Obama administration and the FCC is? How aggressive are they going after this? Aggressive enough? Not aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I hear Commissioner Clyburn speak, and I'm like, all right, what's the problem?
What's the problem,
she understands
right?
it. She gets it. No, it's tricky. I mean, and what we've seen, you know, I spent a bit of time on the Hill, and I spent a bit of time talking to other organizations who were often on the same side with civil rights organizations, advocacy organizations, who are not exactly on the right side. The power. I mean, the power of business lobbyists, corporate lobbyists, is so immense, right? You have something that I think the president does get it. I have no doubt that he gets it. He understands what happened with his campaign. He's talked about it as such. There are groups like ours that simply wouldn't exist if we had, you know, if we had the kinds of rules that I can imagine that we've seen kind of get trial ballooned. If we had some of these practices in place, the ability for companies to control content, we wouldn't be here. The ability for Latino, Black women, you know, bloggers and others to impact the media wouldn't be there. So I think there's not a big question about what's in the public interest, actually, I think, to a large degree. However, very smart, well-funded lobbyists have not only done a good job of getting their voice in play, but they've also gotten other voices in play that I think, and I'm speaking of organizations like ours, but not ours, that I think have been somewhat compromised, and we talked about that. I talked about that in the artitle.
You can name names.
Can you name them here?
I'm not going to name them. It's easy enough to you can name them. You know them. But anyway, so I think that I think the president gets it. I think, you know, I'm understanding more and more. I'm a software guy. You know, I didn't come to the first time I came to DC for a work-related thing was probably it was 4 years ago, but it's extremely powerful. I'm watching because of the work we do on Latino issues. Immigration. You look at how the president, the White House, and folks in D.C. can move around. So I don't know where the commission is.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the president is at this moment. I do know, I'll say this, that I know firsthand there have been members of Congress who've essentially been threatened, right?
Yeah.
To make sure they're on the right by, you know, corporations that you know, give them money. So it's hard to know. I'm hopeful but cautious.
You know, this is actually my last question before we throw it to the audience, so please prepare some questions if you have some. France's Minister of Foreign and European Affairs just blogged for us, and he wrote something really interesting. He said, and I quote, in 2015, 3.5 billion people, 3.5 billion people, half of mankind, will have access to the internet. There has never been such a revolution in freedom of communication and freedom of expression. But how will this new medium be used? So if we can think ahead in 2015, and if we can think ahead as to what the media ecology is going to look like, news being social, the fact that individual people have a role, the me in media have a role to play, where do you see kind of, what does it look like in 2015? I know.
I think either, I'll try to be really brief.
Either or.
It's yeah. I think either.
Or what do you mean?
It's corporate controlled, government controlled, and we get to play games, but real organizing, real advocacy, people creating real news gets shut down. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there are, from a government control perspective, for business interests, there are limits you'd want to put on this wonderful freedom of expression, and we see that happen, right? On the other hand, I think there's this ability for folks in one part of the world to find common cause with folks in a completely different part of the world, come up with solutions, push on each other, create positive movements, pressure movements. It becomes this kind of phenomenal organizing platform. And I don't mean just organizing for, kind of the obvious political purposes, but how we structure government, how we structure our world, what we do with our time. There's the ability to push control of our not only on our voices, but our lives, how we interact with each other, to push that control down in a profound way and have the kind of centers of power react in a very healthy way to that kind of grassroots, everyday person pressure. But again, I think the question is, to what degree does that get limited or supported?
Agreed. I also have this sort of, it's the utopian and dystopian manifestations of our future, in that, in my utopian version of 2015 is that we're all we have free and open platforms, that there isn't just one social network that owns our data and does whatever they want with it.
Whoa.
Just saying. Had to get it out there. Been working on a little campaign. A bunch of people, maybe upset with the whole privacy thing. Just saying. But to me, actually, this illustrates that the Facebook, Twitter, all of these things, which I do encourage people in the book and elsewhere, and in the trainings and workshops that I give to be participating and contributing their voices. But that the large problem with this, and this actually to answer the kind of future question, I want to actually look back in the past and where some things came from. So if you are on Twitter now and you want to send something to Facebook, you can do this thing where you can kind of hook it up and they can talk to each other, right? And that's cool, and we think that everything's playing really nicely together. But if you look at email, one of the first social technologies to come up onto the internet, and ways for people to communicate with one another, created not a market-based product, not a profit-oriented thing, was just built as a communication tool for researchers to talk to each other. It doesn't matter now, even 40 years later, after email was created, it doesn't matter if I have a Hotmail address and you have a Gmail address. We don't have to download a plugin so that they can talk to each other. This is a huge problem where I see the limits of social networking, in that we're creating these walled gardens of content and social capital in a way that could be very, very damaging if Facebook collapses, if Twitter collapses, if Twitter decides to start charging tomorrow for, not saying that I've heard that or anything. No, don't write that down. No, I really haven't. But I mean, if that happens, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do about poor people? What do we do about, losing all of our social capital and those things? So for me, that's where the dystopian version of the future comes in, and that I feel like, has anybody read that book, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson? A couple of people, yes. Nerds unite. Okay, so this is a really good book to read, and a possibility for this kind of dystopian future, in that he visions a lot of our stuff being sort of, everything being privatized, so that the city of Hong Kong becomes Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong area and is run by a corporation, and all of our facilities are kind of go this kind of franchising and privatization direction. And I feel like that's happening already with our data and who we are and who we're creating ourselves.
So whose job is it then to make sure that Facebook and Twitter and all these upcoming social, remember now, just 5 years ago, MySpace was it. Yeah. Or Friendster. Remember Friendster? Yes. Remember Friendster? Whose job it is then? Is it then to regulate and to think about these questions?
I think regulate is the wrong word. Regulate is the big scary word that businesses hate. The big scary word, right? Okay. And so it's not about regulation, but I do think that there could be some real value in investigating a sort of subsidized, out of, the internet was created because it was a defense mechanism.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, DARPA, this is where, DARPANET, yeah, and ARPA later. And so I do think it's worth investigating, investing some sort of subsidization in some kind of social networking platform, and I would like to investigate that further. In an open standards, open platform, free our data, free our lives sort of way. Your turn.
So by the way,
Well, Deanna, I have to say we were having such a good time, and then you punched me in the face.
she went for the kill.
And I can't remember the original question.
The question was.
And wait a second, you jumped on me about us doing things with your information, and then you just ended by talking about liberating data and information, which strikes me as kind of a strange way to end after the way that you started. But
For my data.
well, okay, I'm not gonna. Let's not get into a privacy debate, because that's not what we're talking about. But
I think it is what we're talking. We're talking about our future. That is our
Can you put
Yeah.
James? Can you give her the mic? Go ahead.
No.
sure, no, I mean,
Please do it
look,
publicly. Go ahead.
I will say that the other way of looking at it, which is really how we look at it, and there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear-mongering, and a lot of half-truths about what's going on, and I urge you to email me, noise@facebook.com, if you want,
NOYES
or find me on Facebook,
Facebook.com.
and I would be glad to enlighten you on what our ideas are behind user control and empowerment of their information, because at the end of the day, you join Facebook because you want to be on Facebook, and you are in control of your content. It's just a matter of checking your privacy settings, and
Some easier ones. How about that? Can we do that?
we're always innovating, and we're always listening to our users and making adjustments. So if you've got some ideas on how we can make our privacy settings more user-friendly, we'd love that. But what we're also trying to do, I don't want to go off on this
I know,
course
I had a
because we have
question,
other
but it's
things.
okay, it's all right.
But no, I
Go
think
ahead.
the pressure point is that we want to make it easy for 400 million plus users, right? But we also want to give all of those users granular control of their information, so a college student can share their drunken party photos with their buddies but not their mom. So that's a real tension, between making it super easy for everybody of every capability to really understand, and also giving granular controls. So it's a process.
You want something to add to that, James?
Yeah, really quickly. I think Facebook may be nice and well-intentioned in wanting to serve its
We
users.
are.
But there is, at the end of the day, right, if you can benefit from someone's private information, also, per your privacy policy, if, for instance, if someone wanted to leave Facebook, I start a Facebook competitor, my assumption is you're not going to make it very easy for me to take my identity from Facebook and go wherever with it. If I'm an investor in Facebook, I actually wouldn't want you to do that either, right?
Yeah.
So the point is you've got corporate incentives. Now, it could be that it's a third rail, and this is what we don't have. Everyone's used to giving up. No, we're not even thinking about it for the most part, except the geeks here, right? We're very careful about our
But
information.
everybody's a geek, as far as I'm concerned.
But people will trade off. We just assume, it's out there and we don't worry. But there should be a degree of of awareness and pressure to keep you all honest, right? And I don't know that we have it. So in the absence of that, I think there is this walling off of private data, my data being in 8 different places, controlled by a corporation who, on the one hand, can't really piss me off or can't piss off too many people, but could actually behave in a way that doesn't do the job of serving folks as well as it could. And it's not about Facebook not being good citizens at all. It's just about those dynamics.
I would just make one really quick final point
Go ahead, Andrew.
about changing social norms. 15, 20 years ago, Washington completely freaked out about a technology. The FCC got involved. Congress got involved. It was a 5-year fight. There were court cases. It was like pandemonium. What was that technology? No, that technology was caller ID.
Caller ID. Well,
Right.
That's it.
Okay, by the way, back to my original question before I open it up. Right now, Facebook is basically the third largest country in the world in terms of population.
That is true.
So if you think about it in 2015, where do you see yourself going? Where is Facebook in 2015?
That's a good question. And it's one that's hard to answer.
Of course, privacy is going to be a big issue, yes.
Right. Okay. Yes, but social norms will also continue to change. So, you know, we'll see what the balance looks like. Where's Facebook in 2015? I mean, honestly, when I'm briefed by our folks in Palo Alto, who are the big thinkers, who are the innovators, about what Facebook's going to look like a year from now, or even, you know, innovations, features that we're thinking of rolling out, you know, weeks and months from now, it's just, they're all game changers for me. So it's hard.
Yeah. No.
It's hard to even think that far ahead. But you also have to realize we were founded in a dorm room 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we're the third largest country.
Well, in terms of population.
You're right. So
no constitution, not yet. Yes. Not yet. No, that's coming up. I think there's going to be a Facebook constitution.
All right, we're gonna take some questions from the
Funny.
crowd.
Didn't you think that was funny? Okay.
We have a couple minutes left for some questions. I'm going to first give a question to one of our people participating online, and then we'll pass the mic around for questions here. Question from Ruth Olivier, who writes via Twitter. Does vertical integration and corporate culture influence mainstream media's unwillingness to cover certain stories? It's probably in reference to the stories coming out of Arizona and Jena 6, and if you'd like to answer.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little more, Chip?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you've got. I also think there's a cultural thing where reporters are looking for certain stories that feel right. They fit. And this week we saw at the Jena 6 where there was this fear of being unbalanced, and things that are unbalanced, even if the reality actually isn't well balanced. There's this desire to be balanced. I actually think that those kinds of constraints come from, it may be hard to make the case, but come from a certain kind of verticalization, this control. Those who essentially they're creating the content, they have a play in the pipes, and they have a sense of what it looks like and what is okay as far as news delivery. And that gets broken in blogs. You can have someone who seems kind of crazy, but then they say something really smart, and that gets moved around. I just think the rules are different. So I think it's not even necessarily some evil intent or anything of that sort at all.
It's not like somebody gets together in a room and say, okay, we're gonna.
No, it's just it's that, you know. And I look at the example of the murder in Arizona, and it's like, we don't like to think of racism as very real. And here's, you know, we have certain containers that we want to use to deliver the information.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Bill Neal. I've been writing about the financial crisis for 3 years independently. I got a toughie, two-layer toughie for you. The new technology that you're all about has emerged at what I would call from a right-wing business utopia, and you can dispute that. And I think the technology itself tends to be, like Facebook and Twitter, fast, short, and at times cruelly shallow. And it doesn't have to be, and there are places where you can find longer content. But those two things are major influences on the fact that this panel is called social injustice, but not economic injustice. So tie that together for me, comment it.
Well, for me, social justice, economic justice is a real clear part of social justice. So I think that the topic name was chosen to incorporate racial justice, gender justice, you know. I do understand that I would call it a libertarian utopia, not necessarily a right-wing utopia, because those things can be different sometimes. A market utopia, yes. Agreed. As far as the shallowness of social media, one point that I haven't made yet here, but I often make, is that these tools are not supposed to replace old school hardcore investigative journalism, which requires a lot of overhead and investment. They're not supposed to stop you from going and reading in depth about something. And in fact, it's part of a media ecosystem, and the tools are supposed to play well with one another. And because we see a lot of attention being paid to them right now, because they're new, they're snazzy, whatever, you know, there's obviously a lot of emphasis on them, but certainly they're not something that's going to replace, you know, the good old-fashioned storytelling. It's a different way of telling a story, and it's a complementary way of telling a story. And another thing to realize about them too, a metaphor that I like to use a lot is with these tools, we're sort of at the creation where we've just carved a giant wheel out of stone, and we're all standing around going, "Oh my God, it's a wheel! This is awesome! This is the best thing ever." We don't have an axle, we don't have like a steering wheel, we don't have an engine, we have nothing else except this giant wheel. And there's not a lot of nuance, and there's not a lot of you know, kind of multi-vectored things happening right now. It's pretty blunt. So it's new, and it'll evolve, but it's definitely not a replacement.
Let me add, by the way, to that is, you know, and this is something that I say a lot. All what's happening with these tools and the technologies is they're just reflecting human behavior. It's not as if these things people didn't do these bad things before Facebook or Twitter or all that were around. What I think is really fascinating, as Andrew was making the point, you know, as somebody who has studied Facebook, reported on it and studying it and figuring out how it's changing how we behave, it's fascinating to really think it's only 6 years old. I mean, Facebook in many ways is only as shallow and as only as superficial as you make it to be. It's fascinating the kind of, I mean, campaigns get launched on Facebook. Betty White ended up on Saturday Night Live last Saturday because of Facebook. So I think it's important to kind of think of the spectrum of the behavior that can happen in a social networking site.
One more question here.
Thank you. I'm Matti Posio. I'm a Finnish newspaper editor and a Stanford Innovation Journalism Fellow, working on a book about social media mindset. My question about Facebook, it's interesting because you are 6 years old and you are still seen as this company that was started in a dorm room, and actually not as a company at all, but as a cool thing, and you know. But I sense some kind of suspiciousness, and it feels like you are suddenly becoming almost like a big corporation. You get the same kind of treatment as some of the old media when you do things, and we think that, oh, now they are trying to mess with our minds. So what happens when we start seeing you as a corporation and a company, and that you have business interests as well, in addition to being a cool thing and a very nice place and a great country? Thank you.
Are you running for some kind of leadership position in the country of Facebook? Okay. So I'm sorry. So I guess the question was just kind of how we deal with those two.
The growth, I guess. Yeah. The growth of Facebook.
Yeah, you know, it's certainly something we think about a lot internally, and we certainly still think of ourselves as a startup because we still are very young. And I mean, I've only been with the company since last November. You know, I think it's a good question. I don't think I have any great answers for you about it. I think a lot of the criticism that you hear is based not in fact, but in just kind of confusion by some. And we're trying to remedy that. You know, we innovate quickly, right? So I guess the thing that you really need to remember is that in this larger debate about empowering our users and user control over their information, that sort of thing, when you look at the more granular changes that we make over time, when we changed our homepage layout, people thought it was the end of the world. And a week later, did you even remember what the homepage looked like at all? So it's this cycle of kind of innovating and maybe pushing boundaries, and I think it's something that's important that we do, but we certainly also have to keep, well, at the end of the day, we must keep our users in mind, and it's certainly something we never forget, and we're driven by what our users want and need.
Great.
Okay,
well,
we have some more questions, and if you want to ask a question, put your hand up and we'll come to you.
Okay, apparently we have more time.
Hi, I'm Steve Reinbrecht. I'm the managing editor of bctv.org in Reading, Pennsylvania. We're a Knight Foundation grantee, and we're heavily involved in citizen journalism. I guess I have sort of a practical question. Is there value to somebody coming to our site or our Facebook page and saying something? Or does the value come from the fact that they're giving us a fact or that their opinion has some credibility? I'd love to take everything that everybody writes, but there's only 7 days a week to edit this stuff. So I have to make some judgments and draw some lines. Do I need to do that? Could you comment on if you thought about that and what you think?
Yeah, there's never going to be an end for the need of editorial oversight and curation. What I think is important for organizations doing media work is to be not just thinking about broadcasting in this kind of one-way model of collecting stories and broadcasting them out, but engaging in two-way conversations with their communities. And that's where you can have a lot of power and be able to take advantage of the curation aspects of participating in social networks. So it's certainly hard to judge what's going to be important and what's not going to be important and what's a good story and what's not, but that actually is something that hasn't changed since the beginning of journalism. So unfortunately, there's a larger onslaught of data coming at you. But I think one of the things that you can do is by developing the relationships with your community and really engaging with folks, they're going to also help you curate and filter a lot of that.
I think representation has something to do with it too. I know how disappointed I get with people. It's a lot easier for news organizations not to reflect the diversity of the people that they cover. So it's really no excuse, in my opinion, for articles in news organizations to not have articles that are reflective of people's experiences. I actually think it's just lazy journalism. Yeah. So.
Jim Snyder from iSolon. My question is addressed to Andrew. Facebook has gotten incredible publicity in the last few weeks. In March, I believe for the first time it surpassed Google in usage. That's a real big deal. Benchmark. And then in the last few weeks, Zuckerman introduced the social graph media. Traditionally, Facebook started as an island at Harvard, then went to colleges, and then went to the rest of the world, and now it's spanning out to the entire web from just the Facebook platform as a result of the social graph. So I've read, it's taken off incredibly in just the last few weeks. I've never seen a technology be adopted as rapidly as this social graph technology. I've seen so many different articles about what it means in terms of building trust relationships, invasion of privacy, eating Google's lunch, whatever it is. How has the press coverage been of this technology? What is right and what is wrong in all these, articles about it?
I don't really sleep anymore. No, I'll tell you, and I'm going to echo what I said before. I think a lot of the coverage has been really thoughtful and really interesting. People are kind of looking at what it means to like something outside of Facebook, what it means for that other website, what it means for us, what it means for you as a Facebook user and your friends and your community on Facebook, and how it extends that community out to the broader web. And I think a lot of that coverage has been really, again, very thoughtful. But I think, again, there's also been a lot of fear-mongering and a lot of what-ifs and a lot of criticism that we're going to have to really think through. Certainly, when we announced the social plugins and the instant personalization pilot program. Those were the two big innovations that you mentioned that came out of our F8 conference a couple weeks ago. Those were launched for the engineers. Those were launched for that community who could take that technology and make it grow from our initial 75 partner websites for the social plugins to 50,000 in a week. And I can't even, we're going to talk later today publicly about what it is now, but it's way more than 50,000 now, just a couple weeks out. And I think that some of the confusion around that technology is that if you're liking something on CNN, people are asking, well, what does CNN know about me now? And the answer is nothing, because when you like something on CNN, that is an extension of Facebook. it's a layer of Facebook that's been dropped on an external website. And maybe we didn't get that message out clear enough, and it's certainly something that we're trying to get out. The other program that you mentioned, that you had alluded to, is the Instant Personalization Program. It's a pilot. It's with 3 partner websites, Pandora, Microsoft, and Yelp. And we're certainly watching to see how that goes and taking all kinds of user feedback on it. So I guess kind of watch this space.
We have time for one more question.
One more question, yes.
Great.
And thank you. Good morning. My name is Mary Nichols of the syndicated Fusebox Radio broadcast and BlackRadiosBack.com. We've had this entire panel about social media and social change, yet it still seems within a lot of media channels, the internet is still not taken seriously. We've gone through President Obama's election. We've gone through hearing about other net situations in Iran and other places where the only way we were able to get information is through the internet. Otherwise, we would get somebody else's viewpoint on how things are. What type of social movement is it really going to take to have people finally say, hey, the internet is real and vital, and we just really need to acknowledge what this is all about?
Get rid of newspaper editors. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Dina, go ahead.
Broad cultural change doesn't happen overnight, and the amount of kind of infiltration of the internet into our lives is really maybe only 10 years old. And if you think about other social movements and how long certain things took for there to be widespread, broad understanding that this is just the way things are. I mean, women only got the vote, 80 years ago? That's not that long in the grand history of the country or even civilization for women's rights. And culturally, women still aren't completely equal. So, I understand the frustration of it, but I think that it's a slow but coming movement. I don't think that there's necessarily going to be one spark that says, oh my gosh, the internet's everything. And maybe the internet isn't everything in the end.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because I actually think, most folks, I think the newspaper industry understands. I think, cable news understands. I think the reason why lobbyists are spending the money that they're spending, they understand the way in which the internet is actually extremely impactful. It's changing the way businesses work. I mean, Facebook, the fact that you've got a startup company still thinks of itself as a startup company at the size of Facebook, with the level, like you talk about the homepage changing, with that level of change. The dynamics in play are huge. And you see newspapers closing. You see industries having to adapt. So I think it may not be the kind of thing where people are like, oh yeah, we're an internet culture, or however you want to talk about it. I also don't know that it matters, right? If we talk about it in that way, that the impact is actually there and felt, and there will be a time when it's, it's kind of the obvious thing. I think to a lot of folks it is, though.
The only other thing I would say is that I don't think, there's certainly not going to be some global aha moment, but if you look at at kind of the inside the Beltway, the Washington ecosystem, and how they've responded to social media, particularly Facebook. Facebook was a thing for kids not that long ago, and now you've got more than 300 members of Congress actively engaged on Facebook, both with their formal profiles and also separate campaign pages on Facebook. A lot of state, local, national election campaigns are being run on Facebook and other social media. You look at the federal agencies. I mean, agencies are very slow to move, and now we've got 300 plus government agencies in Washington on Facebook, and they have 400 plus pages. So I think you're seeing it kind of evolve in a piecemeal fashion. And if you stitch all of those things together, then you kind of see that big picture that it is moving. But
and just to close this, I think a lot of this is just meeting the audience and meeting the readers where they're at. I mean, I think frankly, news organizations are still, again, we're still at the very beginning stages of this. And so I think there's going to be a lot of shaking out that needs to happen. So thank you again for listening. I hope this was insightful and helpful. Thank you.
All right.